Okay. Welcome everyone to another installment of the Open Book Tour. We have today Lou Cabeen joining us. Cynthia cannot be here. She sends her love and her regrets. But Lou is a wonderful fiber artist, textile artist, embroiderer, artist from Seattle. She taught at the University of Washington for 23 years, head of the textile fiber artist department.
Program, yeah.
Lou's embroideries are one of the stars of our shows here. Some of the stars of the shows here. She is constantly researching her work and then illustrating it with her fine needle point. Without further ado, Lou Cabeen.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you, Amy, and thank you all for coming. I am delighted to be here, and thank you to Bima and all of the marvelous energy that goes in to providing this space in general to enjoy the arts, keeping it free, keeping it open 7 days a week. And then, of course, this gallery, where kind of unique on the continent, we can come in and see book arts anytime that we're available to do that. It meant a huge amount to me and my students that they could take the bus, walk on the ferry, come over here, and regardless of, they didn't have to pay attention to the museum schedule. If they were free, they knew they were going to see things. And I always incorporated, I and many of my colleagues at the UW in the School of Art, incorporated book arts. Although we don't or didn't have a dedicated book arts major, many of us included the book arts in our interdisciplinary approaches. And so to have this resource for the students was really amazing. And the welcome that we would get from Amy or Cynthia was terrific. So I'm happy to just publicly say thank you. Today I've been invited to talk here in the midst of this great show on embroidered books. And so we've pulled, I asked Amy to pull the piece, of course, that's in the exhibit, but two other works of mine that are owned by the museum that depend entirely almost upon embroidery. But before I start, I know there's a bunch of art energy in this circle. Are there other folks whose work is represented in this show? Fabulous. Do you want to just tell us which ones so that you too can get questions at the end?
Okay, I'm Maya Stone, and my book is the blue book on the second shelf.
With the hand and the eye?
With the hand on it, and it's all about the color blue.
Great, thank you.
I'm Linda Yonker. I stitched the World War I shirt honoring my grandfather's brother.
Thank you. Yeah, great. So, super. Lots of resources for conversation. I thought that we would start today in chronological order rather than the piece that is celebrated in this show with my book, The Geography of Hope, Water. And what I'm going to do with all of my works is give you a little bit of background. We're going to get to play with the artwork. My work tends to require a lot of physical interaction. So we get to clear the table and unfold things and play. And I'll give you some of the background, but I really want questions, okay? So I want you guys to get the information that is most useful to you about the object, about my process, about technique. I did bring my sketchbook. I have brought samples. I am such a textile technique geek. I will keep you here forever. But don't hesitate to ask me how I do some of the stitching. Okay, I'm prepared. I've got handouts for that, or I've got things to show for that. But let's start with the Geography of Hope, Water, which is, so maybe we could click, because we're going to need a lot of space on the table. And this is this beautiful clamshell box was fabricated for me to my design by Carolina Beanstra. All right, so the Geography of Hope. Water is obviously part of a slowly emerging series, and my Geography of Hope. And it is constructed as an accordion meander. All right? Accordion Meander. So you can see the accordion aspect, but as a meander, it will unfold and turn directions so that it allowed me to create a book form that has one side with stitching and collage. And the nice thing about an accordion is if you flip it over, you have text on the other side. So the text in this book is the story of how Seattle, the city of Seattle, came to own their watershed. Because we own our watershed for the last 100 years, our water quality is guaranteed as long as all that stays in place. I mean, I'm not a fool, but. And so I became really fascinated with the climate crisis that we face in the geography of hope. What agencies have we already established that have helped? So as a girl from Chicago, I was really curious as to how it came about that Seattle owns, come on in, that Seattle owns its watershed and protects it. No one but the indigenous peoples have access to our watershed to keep the water quality pure. Anyway, the whole story is here. But let's start to unfold this book because the embroidery part is on the top. So I'm gonna have to maybe we could. Sorry, video. I'm sorry. There's no way else to do this. Nancy, could you help me with this a little bit? So no. No, wait. All right. I don't get to play with this very often. All right. I'll start here. But we're going to have to unfold carefully. Would you guys unfold that? And then feel free to get up off your. Now, pretty soon we have to turn directions. Let's see, one more. There we go. Now we turn. Now you guys get to bring it back. There we go. So this is an accordion meander. So can you see how it's meandering? And it allows me, this structure is marvelous. There we go. Yeah, thank you. This, maybe you guys could pitch in now. Could you help me? Thank you. This format allows you to create a large flat image, right? That when it's unfurled on this side, we have a map of the portion of Seattle's watershed that is owned by the city. And the border is a collage of texts. The ordinance from please don't quote me, 1809 something, that allowed the city, authorized the city to raise the money to start purchasing this watershed.
From whom? The indigenous people?
No, from lumber companies and the railroad. Okay? And there were two small towns, mostly of workers for the lumber companies and the railroad. So and the government owned some also. So so those are the sort of old school typed scans. And then you'll see some Helvetica, those of us who know our type, you'll see some Helvetica because the other primary aspect of this civic fact is that in the 1970s, the Bunt decision allowed the native peoples access back. So in order to maintain the purity of the water, all human activity was barred within this boundary. And that cut the tribal peoples from their summer hunting grounds, and there's also a sacred site. And so in the 70s, that was corrected, and so now those folks. Anyway, this is the book, Geography of Hope. Now, when it's on the wall, one more little story about the piece, and then I'm open to questions. When it's on the wall, obviously we like to look at the map. When it's in the accordion, you can read the text. So when this was displayed at Bainbridge Arts and Crafts a couple of years ago, I had my lovely studio assistant, Arissa, create this small book so that when it's displayed this way, you can read the story. Okay, so, and then we did this digitally. She is a real master at the baseball stitch binding. And this has become very popular, so it's just cardstock from Paper Source and my digital printer, you know what I'm saying. But anyway, the whole story is here. The other thing I'll say about the geography of hope is that what I discovered in trying to tell this story as I did this research is that this whole story is one of gratitude and grief, because of course I expected this to be a celebratory story of government for the people acting on behalf. Not so clear cut at all, right? And so each part of the story, for me as a citizen now in the 21st century, there was an element of gratitude, and then there was a portion of grief. And so this story, each page, if you read the book as an accordion, here in this book, it goes from gratitude to grief, gratitude to grief, and gratitude to grief. And I came to realize as I wrestled to write this text that is actually, those are the compass points on the geography of hope. That's how we navigate, right? Is gratitude and grief every time. So, this is the piece I'm really open to questions. I saw some folks starting to ask.
Give me some direction here.
Location.
Oh, such a good question. I chose not to put a little N. So what we have up there are the occasional, the occasional creeks starting on, oh please, it was a while ago, the name of the mountain, it's Snowmelt. Basically, all of our water in Seattle is dependent on snowmelt up in the Cascades. No, well, I'm sorry, I'm just saying.
No, I know.
Okay, and so up there we have those creeks that are coming out from snowmelt, and then it comes down. We basically have the Cedar River. This is the origin, right? I've forgotten the name for the origins of the Cedar River, if that makes any sense. And so it comes down here, and then down at this end, we have the retaining pond, the dam, and this goes into a pipeline to come to Seattle. Mm-hmm.
What papers did you use?
Thank you for asking. Here's a sample. Here's a sample we can pass around. It's a BFK. I'm going to have to read my own colophon. Sorry, folks. And of course, it's not there. My guess is it's a BFK Reeves. The embroidery is done on Lutradur, this polyester sheet, with silk organza on top, so that we have this nice surface.
And you attach that to the BFK Reeves?
Mm-hmm. Yes, through the binding and also through the couching stitch that sort of shields that edge of the this collage surface.
Each piece, I'm feeling the stitches here, right?
Well, yes. So I made the collage on digitally, and then we stitched carefully so it would be invisible to anchor this. So, right. So thank you, Carolyn. Yes, you can feel the running stitch that's like a basting stitch, which here we go. Does not go through.
Oh.
So it goes through this paper and then it's glued on
Oh, sorry.
to this? Yes.
Goes through that.
And that's called what?
This is called Lutradur, which is a trade name, so it's a capital L. It's made in Germany. Comes in several weights. And I like to use the light one, the lightweight. Yeah, and so then we have basically running stitch. Yeah,
And
mhm.
then gesso on top of that to protect?
No gesso,
Okay.
nothing.
What's the surface on
This is that old school transfer that I know you've done some teaching, Carolyn. That was just like the bane of our existence in art ed. And I started this project because there's a new technology for transfer. I don't think I've used it in some of the books that are in the collection, but we didn't pull them. And I'd done all the stitching, I'd done all my research, I was ready to make these transfers, and someone discovered that there was a bad chemical in it, and they took it off the market. So I had to go back to the old school transfer stuff. I'm still twitching.
Accordion that back up and you can pass it around.
Sure.
Is this a baseball stitch?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I need to
So,
learn how to do that.
Okay. We could. All right. So let's flip. If you don't mind, we'll start from there. Thank you. And so you can see this other form of transfer. Well, any transfer is going to. Right? Okay, Xinyal. Thank you. Thanks. And the whole story is available here. Or once it's in an accordion, you can read.
So what do you mean by old school transfer? What exactly did you use?
It's this stuff you can buy from Dharma. I'm embarrassed. It might be in my notebook. It's just like it's very, very demanding. It's there. That's a polite way. It's very demanding to use because it's essentially plastic, right? Thank you. Thank you all.
How long did it take you to make this? All her life.
Yeah. About.
I do.
No, right. Yeah. And I was working on this for over a year, I think, between the research and realizing how I wanted it to look, and then the stitching, and yeah, probably 8 months. Yeah, so that's a running stitch, and then there's all the tests with which color of variegated blue, would the variegated be right? Did it need to be something else? And then we transferred, I derived the wetlands. I'll pass this around. I derived the wetlands from USGS maps, which also dictated the size, right, of the finished piece. And then used, the magic. I am such a fan of this. The purple is air soluble, not soluble, sublimation. So this is a pen that will mark fabric, and the ink is purple, and it sublimates into the air. So to get rid of it, you don't have to get your surface wet, which is huge for a lot of it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so this is the brand I personally like, but any of the brands of textile markers, if it's purple, that means it's air sublimating. If it's blue, that means you need water to get rid of it. Air erasable fabric marking pen. Okay, so has the sample made it around, or shall I?
No, it hasn't.
Okay. So if you know, all right. Okay, so that's one piece.
Did you make multiple copies of that? Or is that
No, this is a one. Everything I'm going to show you today is one of a kind. My embroidered pieces are just one of a kind. And so now that Nancy has this open, you can see that this particular kind of transfer is essentially a plastic layer that will absorb the ink from your digital printer. And then heat is required, right, to release it onto your fabric. And it's very, what it requires to do well is a really strong stomach and nerves and a heat press. So it's difficult in the home studio with an iron, is what I'm saying. So a heat press is what you really need to get a nice, from a book standpoint, a nice, sizable, smooth application, right? Yes, of course, yes. Okay, ready for the next one? All right. So this is a much more recent piece. This is the Herbarium Martyrium, the Herbarium of Martyrs, and it is usually a portion of it is on display in that empty case. Once again, credit where credit is due. Jules Fay fabricated this portfolio for me. So, geography of hope, grappling with climate change from a standpoint of hope, led me to my delight to the fact of phytoremediation. That's P-H-Y-T, phyto, as in plant remediation. These are plants that are used, that can be used to remediate contaminated soil and water. And I personally derived great hope from that. And I had also, at the same time, sorry, ladies, we're going to have to, at the same time began to enjoy drawing. Actually, I'll just click this. Drawing botanicals. And so I began to research plants that are used in phytoremediation. And so I also, because I draw really slowly, you know, my botanical, I'm not really a scientific illustrator, but I love to draw plants. And I apprenticed myself to the processes of botanical illustration, which is quite demanding. And realized that I draw so slowly, the plants kept wilting. Oh, God. And, you know, botanical illustrators have all kinds of tricks to keep them fresh. You know, you can put them in the refrigerator for 10 minutes and you bring it back out. But none of it really worked for me. And so when I discovered that botanists have an entire practice of making herbarium sheets with dried specimens, I thought, okay, I'm good. So I've been working from the herbarium at the Center for Urban Horticulture on campus, and the Burke Museum also has an herbarium in which there are thousands, tens of thousands of sheets of paper, a little heavier than this, but this size, of dried specimens of plants. And so at last, you know, the plant will stay put, and I can draw enough. Okay, so I decided to make my own herbarium of Martyrs. So these are all plants which in one way or another are used in phytoremediation. And I set up this unique book. This is a one-of-a-kind book. Another way to talk about it as a book is as an unbound, right? It's an unbound, unique book. I designed this to look at these sheets. There are 12 of them. In the same way botanists look at herbarium sheets, and it's upside down for me, but it's right side up for you. And the botanists tend to look at the herbarium sheet this way. They pick it up by the two sides, and then they set it down carefully on another one. So Jules and I designed this portfolio to, you know, in a perfect world. I love the way they're displayed here. This is nothing at all as a negative about the way Amy derived a way to display these pieces in an art context. But I did design the piece around that sort of scientific practice, which I really like to, as an artist, to borrow formats, because I believe that the physical act of other disciplines informs us some way, right, if we participate in it. So I will also allow I'll also decode what I did. So I have my own drawings. These are my drawings that I've stitched onto the paper using backstitch. And then herbarium sheets traditionally have a label which is full of obscure and completely incomprehensible to me scientific information. Essential to the botanist and the horticulturist, absolutely, but completely impenetrable to me. So I have modified, for my herbarium of Martyrs here, I have modified the label. This is the classic size of the label. This is the position of the label. And I've modified it so that when you read it, you get a story, you get like the spine of a story of where this plant has successfully been used to remediate a toxic situation. When I started to research phytoremediation, I really realized as an artist I did not want to contribute to wishful thinking. The sunflower is not going to save us. It is a marvelous plant. It has a huge biomass. It accumulates toxins out the wazoo, but it is not, a panacea. So we can't restore Chernobyl or Fukushima by just throwing sunflower seeds, which there is some early writing last century that kind of implies that. So I just wanted to share with the world, with you guys, stories that have genuinely happened. Does that make any sense? So that was my research project, which took quite a while. The question on time is a really good one. I do a lot of research because I want my work to be as honest as I can make it. So I do a lot of research, and then I make the work that I want to make. It's this balance, right? But I really, really love living in that space between what I know, what I can find out, what others know in this part of the world, this part of experience, the horizontal, and also what I know, right? What I know this way. So these are the stories. So for example, here we have the sunflower, which I did start out with sunflowers. They're so marvelous to draw, and they don't wilt real fast too. I'm just saying. So I have my herbarium. So all herbariums are labeled. Herbarium Martyrium, number 1701, which is the order in which I made the sheets. I made them in 2017, and this is the first one. And then the date, 1996, is actually the date of this story, right? And then it says scientific name. I do give you the scientific names of all these plants. The common name is a sunflower. The location is Chernobyl. The location of this story is Chernobyl. And then the use of the plant is hydroponic plantings, clear ponds of radioactivity, but the plants must be harvested and destroyed as toxic waste. And that's the aspect of martyrdom. So phytoremediation is a very problematic source of hope, right? Once again, we have gratitude that the living systems provide for these things, and we have grief that our mess is going to cost these beautiful creatures their productive lives. And that is the case for all of these examples. Although every once in a while, you can. Would you like to see the back? Should we talk about the back? Okay, one quick last thing while I stay on this. No. Thank you for your question. Some of the herbarium sheets you will find have a variegated thread was used. This is the boxwood, and you'll notice on the label, these plants that I stitched with the variegated are actually indicator species. So these are plants that are found that they will accumulate no toxin. They will die immediately in the presence of the smallest amount of hydrocarbon. And so they are being encouraged, or landscape designers are being encouraged to plant these plants near gas stations so that there's an early warning system for leakage. So I couldn't not spend some time thinking, and because while I'm stitching this, I'm really sort of thinking a lot about these issues, so I couldn't not do that. So there are 4 out of the 12, four of the plants have this kind of thread used, and they are those indicator plants. Now, the question about the back, yeah?
Do you pre-poke the papers?
Yes.
Because no one can believe that these are hand stitched. It looks like machine stitching from the front.
Okay, and I brought my samples. Thank you. Perfect. I'm prepared for these questions. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. So first of all, the back. I decided to leave the back this way because, first of all, I just aesthetically liked it. They're completely tagged. The idea was that we were going to then trim at the end right up close after fray checking. Those of you who work with textiles, there's not really knots. There's just windings, and they're fray checked. And then we clipped first with about a 1/2 inch layer. We clipped first, and we left that 1/2 inch so we knew which ones we'd fray checked, right? As we're working through. And then I just couldn't resist this energy on the back. So I usually have a sharper conceptual reason for that, but I decided I'll just have to tell you, I just like the way this looks. That's why you get to see it too. Yeah.
In a frame, how do you keep the paper beautifully straight?
I don't use a frame, but I did come. I'll tell you what. So Amy, do you want to help that and move that?
We can pass them around if you.
Oh yes, of course. Or we could set it. I just wanted to set this down on the table.
Why don't we put this one back?
This can go back.
And that's my sample in my sketchbook. All right, so I'd heard from Amy that there was a lot of questions about how I make this. So first of all, I don't know if you're interested. So first of all, here's the short run. I do my drawings on tracing paper, which is the classic method to start the botanical illustrations. I do my drawings on tracing paper, and then I transfer them to the BFK Reeves by pre-punching. So I'll pass this around. You can see, and these are all samples I did to try to determine which thread I was going to use for the indicator species. It's in here. So this is my notebook. You're welcome to look at it. Here we go. Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. Okay, so again, here's a sample that I chose not to use, and I'll pass this around this way. Here's my drawings derived from the tracing paper that I have pre-punched the holes. What I do is I've got my tracing paper, so pretend this is a blank piece of paper underneath. I line it up. I don't use a frame. I line it up, and I put pattern weights on this to hold it in place. No adhesives. And then I have, I have corrugated cardboard, secret to my success, underneath. And I have my other favorite tool, which is why you think it's machine stitched. I have my compass. I've replaced the carbon, the graphite thing with another pointy thing, and I start punching holes along my tracing.
And you punch two and you move it and put one point
Exactly.
into the next one.
Exactly. And I use this as a measure. And I'll pass this around, and you can see some of the holes. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. And then of course, complex drawings do not always lend themselves to the predetermined size. I do a lot of samples to figure out the size of this puppy. And so I will use a pin, and individually punch the holes. And then I have the fun of taking this away and just seeing a mishmash of holes in my fabric and needing to translate but from my drawing back to the
You said fabric, but you mean paper.
I mean paper, yes, thanks. Thank you for. So that's how I do this.
Wow.
I love it. I just love it. So I'll pass that around, of course. I brought later, if you'd like to see, I do a lot of research and I keep it, or I try. And so this is my Herbarium of Martyrs notebook, where I have all of the tracings that went into all the individual drawings, right?
How many drawings did you do? I mean, how many?
There are 12 sheets. There are 12 Herbarium sheets. Mm-hmm. Great.
Do you have another book in this order, or do you?
Yes, I do. So in this Herbarium series, this is the first of a series. In the Herbarium series, I'm making an herbarium of useful plants, and these are actually dried plants. These are actual plants that I'm drying and I'm collaging. So, and these are useful plants that I have found within a radius of 5 blocks of my home. Okay, and the plant form is dried and mounted in the classic way. But instead of this scientific label, I really want to encourage all of us to pay more attention to the plants around us in our daily life. And so instead of the scientific label, even modified, I've collaged personal information and more autobiographical or idiosyncratic knowledge about that plant. And so that's in the works. And there'll be a third one sooner or later. I mean, now that people know that I'm interested in this is the story of my life as an artist. I do all this research. I just like sweat bullets to find information. I make dates to go to meet professors who are doing genetic modification on plants in order to learn more about phytoremediation. And I clean up well. My mother would be proud of me, and I keep my mouth shut, so I learn a lot, right? Mm-hmm. And so I do a lot. And then, so I've done all this stuff to get these 12 pieces. And now that people know I'm interested, I'm just getting stories about plants that are, they're just like drifting into my studio. So maybe there'll be another version of the martyrdom plants.
What about fungi? Are you going to work with fungi?
Yeah, I'm really interested. They're just not as much fun to draw.
Oh,
I just have to say, it's just again, that's just an aesthetic.
For shading.
right.
I know. See, you can tell. I'm not a big one for shading. I'm fascinated by fungi, and actually, they are the thing that's probably going to save us all, if anything is. But like I said, I honestly, and I'm working on it. I'm making a joke, but I haven't really found a way for my hand to render them in a satisfying way. Okay. All right. Is there time? I don't have my time.
You're good.
Okay. So now we can switch. So the last of the embroidered pieces that I asked Amy to bring out are a switch from my look, and this is very current work. This was just shown in January, and here's an answer to time. As you'll see, when you look at the numbers, I started this in 2017, and I showed it finished in this form in January of this year, 2019. So that's 2 years of, and of course I dated 2017. I mean, yeah, because that's when I finally had enough going to start stitching. Right. Okay.
Which thread did you end up using on this?
So the black thread is Valdani. It's a Valdani, not their floss. I'm embarrassed I can't call out the name, but the Valdani, it's actually called antique black. So it's actually a variegated black, which also helps with this kind of energy. We don't necessarily see the variegation, but it helps with that energy.
V-A-L-D-A-N-I.
It's an Italian.
D-A-N-I.
And this is their stuff that comes on spools rather than in the balls. Yeah. Okay. Tools. Let me see. Let me just move this because, of course, we get to. Amy, do you want to just? Sorry, poor woman. If you could just move the geography of hope. Oh yeah, or put those out. Yeah, that'd be great. There. No, that's perfect. Okay. All right, so now we're going to switch gears. This is slightly earlier work, although I did show it. Okay, it was shown here. Some of these were shown at Bainbridge Island. Bainbridge Arts and Crafts. Yes, thank you. Yes, underneath. Yes, right. Yes, the woman. Yes, thank you. Keeping me honest.
What was Bainbridge Arts and Crafts?
It is back again. Back again.
I know.
Okay. So, at various points in my personal transition, and this is actually related to gratitude and grief, but not about the climate. At various times in my life, I've been on the planet long enough to have some hindsight, right? It turns out that I've been drawn to St. Clare of Assisi. And as I've gone through transitions, I find myself really looking to her legends and making artwork. So when I moved from Chicago, when I found myself over 40 with 2 teenage children and no health insurance, and I needed a job, and the University of Washington, in their wisdom, hired me. And I had to move my children and myself from Chicago, our home, out here. I found myself doing a series in which I took on St. Clair as my alter ego. And then, I'm not quite sure exactly what transition I was going through, but I found myself drawn once again to St. Clair in the last maybe 5 years or so. And so I've done this series of pieces, each one based on a different legend of St. Clair, and I have used the format of liturgical textiles, textiles that are used in the celebration of the Eucharist. And so we have a burse, this hard, which I made, that opens up, and this is the first one I did, called Blessing. This opens up, and we take out a textile which is based upon the corporeal. The corporeal is the fabric that is spread out on the altar prior to the bread and wine coming out, so that any spillage will be contained in a fair, literally in a fair linen cloth. So that's the format for all of these pieces, and they are made to be handled just the way I did, to be opened up and unfolded. And as a book, and so each of these are unique. And they are rough on purpose. St. Clair, of course, like St. Francis, was dedicated to poverty. Although she and her nuns did do very fine embroidery for the church. So what you saw me do, or maybe didn't for the video, is unfold a fabric which has a lot of chaos on it. And when you're up close, you can see that these are recipes. These are bits of recipes cut up, and in what I felt was a chaotic way. And these squares are stitched onto a fabric which has been overprinted with silkscreen, the recipe used by the women in my then church to make the communion bread. And they had several different versions, and so I printed them on this piece of fabric. And then, as we unfold it and we get to the interior, we have a text that starts here, and it reads, "St. Clair and her sisters learn to bless their own bread, and all who partake of it are happy." And so that's the blessing piece. Does this work for everybody if I do this with each of the four? Okay, and then my thought was, with book arts, with any interactive art like the reset button, my hope is that it's very self-evident that you keep the hard surface on the outside, and and it folds up. Again, that is the traditional way to fold up the corporeal.
There's something heavy or thick in there.
It's just this. Do you see?
It's just that?
Yeah, that's all that makes it heavy are these surfaces of card.
Oh,
Do you see what I mean?
recipe card.
Recipe card, literally, recipe cards. So I don't know, Amy, do you think if I just pass this around so people could see the making, the method of making? Let me make sure.
I'm sorry.
Huh?
Were those cards printed on other
No,
paper?
these are my actual recipe cards, and my grandma's and my mom's. My actual recipe cards.
Your grandmother's too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, this got put away backwards.
Two hands,
We'll just
those
get
two
this
hands,
reset.
please. Thank you.
Okay.
No, you're good.
So shall I stay? I'll still talk about the books, and then I'm happy to decode any of these legends because they're all based on an actual legend of St. Clair. So here we have Picnic. Again, the burse. Yeah, maybe here I'll just get that out of our way.
What fabric is you use?
Yes. So the question, I'm happy to, thank you. Just call out those questions. The fabric is the same in all of these, and it's a bamboo. It's actually a bamboo based fabric that, that's woven up like a linen. You know, it has that sort of nice, that nice texture, the surface, so the textile geeks like me, it has that nice texture, surface texture, but in fact it's drapey, it's very soft, which is what the bamboo would allow. So here we have picnic, and once again we have silkscreen printing and a stiffer surface, which I hoped would sort of be reminiscent of picnics, right? Ginger or gingham plaid. And we unfold it as per. Let me hold it up for the video. We unfold it in the ritual way. And this one says, St. Clair and her sisters break bread among the laurels and find they have become all flame. And so in this case, you can see, again, I'll hold it up for the video, you can see the silkscreen printing of leaves, laurel leaves, slightly coming through the fabric. And the text is stitched in cross stitch. I use a lot of couching to make the images of bread, and feather stitch in a variegated thread is used for the flame. Okay?
Did you know you were going to work on the series when you did your first one?
No, I didn't. And there was quite a gap between the first one, because once again, it was very difficult to actually have those ladies give me their recipe. A little hard. And I really, really struggled with the imagery. But then once I'd sort of found the format, I was happy with the way that worked. You know, I solved the sort of technical problems of how could I make something that people would know how to fold and unfold. Does that, you know, and it really did work. Does that, you know, aesthetically as well as people understanding what to do. Then I couldn't resist all these other marvelous. Let's see. Do we have one going around?
Right here.
Okay. So how about if I?
Can I nudge you and talk to people about how you do your cross stitch?
Yes, and actually I'm prepared with that too. Thank you so much. I don't pay these people to ask these questions.
Yes, you do.
I haven't. No, I
And you do all, you've done every single stitch.
Yes. So this is all hands. So I made the decision. I hold nothing against fabulous artists who use machines to do their stitching, but that surface, and especially the sewing machines that use text. I had a number of graduate students who did beautiful work with that technology when it first came out. But for me, that surface is not what I'm after with my work and what I hope to evoke, if you will, just from the surface, you know, regardless of reading the text or something like that.
It's the hand of the artist.
Yeah, and so when I choose to stitch a text, it's because it's this, it just needs my hand. I want my hand to stitch it. So you'll notice that I didn't stitch the text on my herbarium sheets. You know, I'm not a martyr. I mean, I'm perfectly happy because that's, you know, that's a scientific label. That's evoking a scientific label where they're typed or they're digitally printed, and I'm perfectly happy with that. But the plant itself, that plant form itself, I wanted to stitch. So thanks for that question. I do use a lot of cross stitch in making text on my work. I will use other people. I have designed my own type fonts to use in cross stitch quite a lot. This particular one is one I found from a French book. And I'll chart out my text. I really have only used cross stitch for text. You can use it for all kinds of other things, but I've only used it for text. So I chart out my text, and then I use waste canvas. and I'll pass this around. Excuse me. So waste canvas is this stuff. It comes in different size grids, and it's a cotton grid that is held together with starch. So you can baste this material onto your fabric and use this grid as a way to guide your stitching. And then you can dampen this just very slightly. It dissolves the starch, and with tweezers you can pull it out. Hence waste. Waste as in W-A-S-T-E. And so
What are you pulling out?
this stuff, I'll show you. So there's that, and so it allows you to do cross stitch on any textile surface, It doesn't have to be even count linen or Aida cloth. So I'll pass that around, and here I'm set up to do it because I get the same questions. And of course, oh God, my entire career I've had to thread needles with an audience. No, I shouldn't. Why do I not do this ahead of time? On the other hand, is this useful? This information? Okay. I didn't. No, I finished it. All right. Okay. Hey, I live right. Okay, so here we go. I don't like to use knots, so I leave a long string no matter what stitching I'm doing, and then I work it in later. So I've got my grid, and I have this basted down, right? Where am I? I'm on that M. So now I'm going to, so can you see it? Well, I realize some of you can't see. Feel free to come on up here, or I can move. Okay. But y'all can see I've done half my stitches, and now I'm going to go back in. And can you see how I'm using that grid?
Oh, yes.
There you go. See? And so consequently, because I'm using, how is this doing for the video? Because I'm using that grid to place my stitches, the stitches are quite regular, and I never pierce the white thread. So you can pull it out. Right? Okay. Yeah, see? See? So it makes a square. It makes a series of squares. But you have to...
You're not piercing it, but you're having thread go over the...
Exactly, yes. But it's not...
Dampen it, the starch goes in, and you...
And it'll just pull out from underneath the stitch. Thank you. So basically the waste canvas will pull out from underneath the stitch. Right?
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, and so then you're translating from your, in this case, your chart, or like when I was doing the botanical drawings, my drawing, translating the holes or the opportunities for the needle to pierce, right, with the drawing in which you want. Okay? So let me get another stitch. And maybe this will probably be useful. I'm going to pass this around so that you can see, the construction of the stitch. That might be helpful.
On picnic.
Yeah.
Go ahead. The green, was that the fabric? The star?
No,
the greenery on it?
Thank you, Hope, for that question. The green was printed, silkscreen printed on top. I did that. So I did some botanical drawings of laurel leaves and made burned a screen and printed it. So the base fabric for all of the clairs is that neutral that we saw on the first one, is that neutral color. Great question.
Lou, you may have said this and I missed it, but what's the significance of the circles with the pluses and turned?
Well, I see those as the host, as the bread, the communion wafer.
Oh, okay. Did they have
This-
a little I'm not Catholic. Do they have little?
Some of them do. So thank you. I'm going to use Carolyn's question. So some of them do have crosses, not all of them. It's very true. The legend that I'm referring to in Blessing is that St. Clare, the Pope, the then Pope, is coming to visit Clare's convent. And so she has her sisters make massive amounts of bread. I mean, they just bake bread, and they have this pile of bread because she's going to have the Pope bless it, and then feed the village with that bread blessed by the Pope. And so the Pope comes, and he has actually come to her convent because he needs her advice. She's considered a very holy woman with direct access, if you will. And so the Pope has come to her. The Pope has come to her, and he won't bless the bread. And he says, no, I would not presume to bless this bread that you and your sisters have made in the presence of you. And the legend is, and I think this is a little Victorian gloss myself, the legend is that she refused because she takes obedience from the Pope, right? And so he orders her to bless the bread herself. And she blesses the bread herself, and crosses miraculously appear on all of the bread. That's the legend I was referring to. And I was hoping that what I was dealing with, and when I made that piece, having no idea whether anybody else would ever want to look at it, was this chaos that we go through, like to procure food. There's just this chaos. Oh God, I hated it. And yet then there's, if you learn to bless your own bread, then it's there, right? The story about the picnic is a legend, which is actually how I was introduced to St. Clare. I used to hang out with Franciscans quite a lot in Chicago, and in their eating hall, there was this very bizarre, very surreal painting of St. Francis and St. Clare in prayerful mode, the oracular posture, and flames are just like, and I said, are they in purgatory? What's the deal? I mean, this is kind of fun to eat lunch with this. And several of my cohort in grad school were Franciscan priests, and so they were too cheap to pay for lunch, at the museum, so they'd take me into the rectory and eat. So I said, so tell me, so it turns out, and this is my picnic story, the legend is that St. Francis and St. Clare are devoted to each other, but they don't get together very often, and the sisters and the brothers convince them that they need to meet and just spend some time together. So they take a picnic. They take a picnic to this little chapel near Assisi, and they unpack the picnic, and they start to pray, and they are caught up in such a powerful communion that the villagers think the chapel's on fire because they see the radiance. And they come running up to the chapel with buckets of water to put out the fire, and instead they see Francis and Clare in prayer. So that idea of being caught up, right? Shall I talk through the rest of these? Okay.
Yeah.
So here's offering. And this one, oh, you know what? I'm gonna save this for last. I'm gonna talk about defense next. This is defense, same thing, the burse. Defense. And what we have here, the hard surface, is digitally printed collage of disasters, disaster headlines. Chaos, contemporary chaos. And so again, we unfold. St. Clare wakes to find barbarians at the gate. and disarms them with the fearless offer of holy food. So the legend is that the Saracens, medieval term for non-Christians, the Saracens are at the gates of Assisi, and they have penetrated the village, and they are at the gates of the convent. And she is elderly, and her sisters are trying to protect her from this crisis. But she, of course, is awakened by the alarm. She goes out, and she insists on standing in front of the Saracens, and she holds up, this is a miracle story, okay? She holds up the vessel, I believe it's called a monstrance, that holds the reserved host, so the bread that has been blessed. And she holds it up and repels the Saracens. And that's the imagery. And so you will often see, when you see pictures of St. Clare, her signifier, for iconography is often this monstrance that is glowing. And it's from that story of repelling the Saracens with bringing holy food. But when you dig into the story a little bit more, shorten it up, Lou. She argues, the sisters record her arguing with them and demanding to be let out, and they won't let her out to face the Saracens, and so she starts to pray. And she starts to pray, and the sisters can't act. They're they're stopped, and so then she walks out and she's praying, and there's actually no mention of this. So again, I think that's a Victorian gloss to put the big fancy thing, next to her, but I wouldn't know. So the actual legend, and that particular legend comes from the testimony that happened to make her a saint, the trial to see if she. So that's defense. And again, we have all of these things that we're facing. And last but not least, offering. So this is back to the very start of Clare's call. She has to work hard to get St. Francis to accept her as a female follower of him. And so it's offering. Both Clare and Francis came from a lot of money. A lot of money. And of course, they're accepting this life of poverty. And when Francis has finally completely refused to accept a female, to allow a female to come into this life, Clare and her sister or maid, depends on the story, escape her father's castle. They go to the ramshackle chapel where St. Francis is with his brothers, kind of holed up, if you will, and she insists that he cut her hair. So, because of course, once her hair is cut, she's no longer marriageable, which is her value in that society. So it's a very dramatic story. This is also documented in the by multiple people. So he ordains her and cuts her hair at midnight, just as her brothers show up with weapons to drag her home. So why isn't that a movie is what I want to know. All right, so you can see where I come from with this, the money, this medieval pair of scissors, and we unfold it. And the text is, St. Clare cuts her hair and cuts her losses, puts her hand to the plow and moves on. And the outside is my children's hair, which is couched onto the outside of the surface. And then on the inside, you'll see all this seed stitch and a kind of labyrinth. Okay? Yay. Thank you for your patience in hearing all my stories.
Oh, this is
And I'm very, very happy to answer questions if there are any.
Thank you, Lou.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.